I'm John Little, and this is the ShockCast.
Altitude, velocity, light. 8.5 down, 220 feet. 15 forward. 11 forward, coming down nicely.
Okay, Houston, we've had a problem here.
Okay, we're diving in. And I'm only doing this because Operation Gladio represents a snapshot of what governments and organizations become when you give them power, money, and secrecy. Any two of those is bad. All three together are catastrophic. The core of the problem isn't an ism like communism, fascism, or the fervent belief in lasagna. It's not an ideology or even philosophy. It's not even religion or the lack of one. The problem is that we human beings are awful. Then you won't find books examining proven conspiracies from the light of our human awfulness. We don't like looking closely at how awful we are. Anyone who says that they know everything that there is to know about Gladio and the many stay-behind armies created by NATO is probably lying to you. Intelligence operations are heavily compartmentalized, so much so that even those in leadership often know only a small part, if anything, of the details. And we only know about the Italian version of these groups because they screwed up. Mistakes were made within the Italian stay-behind army, and too many people talked. Eventually, the knowledge of Gladio became far too public, and Giulio Andreotti, Prime Minister of Italy, revealed the existence of this above top secret organization in Italy, and it was called Operation Gladio. What is a stay-behind army? Well, after World War II, it was believed that the Soviet Union was interested in conquering the rest of Europe. That's why the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, NATO, was formed 4 years after the end of World War II. Since NATO was not confident that they could stop a Soviet invasion of Western Europe, they created secret stockpiles of weapons and ammunition so that resistance groups behind enemy lines could cause as much trouble for the Soviets as possible to slow them down while the West struggled to push back the invasion. This worked well against the Germans during World War II, and NATO hoped that an even more organized resistance organization would work even better. It was a good idea. The problem was that these stay-behind armies that we generally refer to now as Gladio became subverted. And their subversion started out with something a bit like good intentions. The Soviets were giving aid to socialist and communist movements in Western Europe, and that aid was boosting socialists and communists into positions of power. This alarmed the leaders of NATO, and as the saying goes, if all that you have is a hammer, every problem is a nail. Instead of fighting socialism on the battleground of ideas, they chose the path that they knew best: violence. In this case, assassination and false flag attacks to create a fear of socialism in the hearts of the average European. This was a vile and evil thing to do, but it was even worse than that. Intelligence operations cost money, and even the simple task of just gathering intelligence is expensive. Acts of sabotage, assassination, and terrorism cost even more money. And the leaders of Operation Gladio couldn't ask their unsuspecting governments for the cash that they needed to terrorize the public. So they turned to drugs. Tons of heroin came from the Golden Triangle of Southeast Asia and hit the streets of Europe and the U.S. Cocaine came from South America, and marijuana, well, it came from everywhere. So on top of the terrorism, you had the scourge of horrifying drugs and destroyed lives. In fact, the drugs were even worse than the violence, and that wasn't the only thing that they did, but we'll leave the details for later. The point that I want to make here is that a good idea was subverted by men who lacked conscience. This good idea was used to stop a minor evil with an even greater evil. Instead of using superior ideas, they used superior force. They also fell prey to an age-old problem. Large, hierarchical, and secretive organizations with access to lots of money will always turn evil. Always. There is literally no exception to this rule in history. You only need to look at the Roman Catholic Church as our biggest example. And the most recent illustration of my point is the whole Russiagate fiasco. And both the Republican and Democratic parties are irredeemably corrupt. And yes, both parties. I believe that the reason why God set up the New Testament church to be small with little hierarchy was for the purpose of keeping our churches from becoming corrupt. Unfortunately, even our best churches have instituted unbiblical hierarchies that have allowed our churches to become bloated and corrupt institutions. God does not like hierarchies in his church, and a hierarchy, a system where there are levels of authority between the bottom and the top, is forbidden by God. We are all equal in the eyes of God, and we should all be equal in the eyes of each other. There should be no hierarchy, no levels of authority in our churches. But that's a discussion for another time. The point is that a good idea went bad because human beings are awful. And in the rest of this series, I plan on showing you what went wrong, how it went wrong, and even why it's not being stopped. More importantly, you need to understand that there are a lot of organizations out there like Operation Gladio, and you can see these organizations when you see them have power, money, and secrecy. That's all it takes for your greatest evils to flourish. Hey, you like that video, right? Great. Click like and subscribe and hit that bell to get notified. Then go to the next level. Subscribe to the Shock Letter at theshockletter.com and follow me on Twitter and Facebook. Now, read my book, Ezekiel's Fire, at ezekielsfire.com. Why? Because Ezekiel's Fire is coming.